Hello, hello. This video, I'm gonna show you a map here. This is from the PowerPoint. So this is, there's a map in the textbook. I think it's page 636, but here's another map to help you with the practice test. Okay, we left off looking at Medal of Honor winners from Iwo Jima. So just going to continue. I know I read about these men and then I think, man, I'm just trying to honor what they did. And maybe it's tedious for you to listen or read about these guys, but I just so impacted by what these men did. And so here's this Lieutenant Martin. So he was, I believe, wounded early in the action on Iwo Jima, but then right towards the end of the battle, basically the last significant day of fighting, they get attacked by kind of a desperate group of Japanese. And so, determined to rescue several of his men trapped in positions overrun by the enemy, he got to these Marines, getting hit twice in the process. And then he directs his men back to his own lines, and then these Japanese start throwing grenades at him. So all he had was a pistol, so he just charged in there and killed them, killed all four. And then he realized that his men could not defend off another attack. So similar to what Joshua Chamberlain did at the top of Little Round Top in the Battle of Gettysburg, right? Chamberlain had repulsed multiple Confederate attacks, and then he realized they didn't have enough ammo to repulse another one, so they just went on the offensive. They, attached bayonets and charged them. Well, in his case, he did something similar, called his men to follow, and they charged right into the midst of the enemy, and he was firing his weapon and scattered them until he was hit by a grenade. But this man, what leadership he showed. He survived the entire battle of Iwo Jima to die at the very end, and he did so heroically, leading his men and saving them, those who were surrounded, who certainly would have died if the Japanese had captured them or whatnot. So amazing. And here's another Navy corpsman. This man by the name of Pierce. You can read his Medal of Honor citation here. So it says he was continuous under fire carrying out his assignment, and this machine gun fire wounded a different corpsman and 2 of the 8 stretcher bearers who were carrying 2 wounded Marines. So he quickly took charge, carried the newly wounded men to a shelter position, rendered first aid. After directing the evacuation of 3 of the casualties, he stood in the open to draw the enemy's fire, and then he covered the escape of the litter bearers, getting the other wounded out. And then, his next guy he's working on gets hit. He risks his life to save the patient, exposing himself again to an attack. And then he lifted a wounded man onto his back and went across 200 feet of open terrain. And then he went again back across that same path to rescue the other wounded man. And then he led a combat control to the sniper nest, and while trying to help another Marine who was wounded, he was hit. And then refusing aid for himself, he directed treatment for the casualty. And Ian says he inspired his entire battalion. So just And these are just the men that we know of did heroic things, right? There was plenty of guys, I'm sure, fighting on Iwo Jima who did very heroic things in the course of the battle that no one really knows about because everyone who knew about it died, or their story just never got told. But I want to talk about the, this is, before I move on, the 5th Marine Division Cemetery at Iwo Jima. And so there was a commemoration here before they left the island at the end of March, where these men got to say their final goodbyes and dedicate the cemetery, kind of like what Lincoln did at Gettysburg. All right, so obviously some of you probably know about the flag raising on Iwo Jima. And so this is the first of the flag raising. So these guys fighting on Mount Suribachi early in the battle, I think D-Day +4, and they getting near the top. This is not anywhere close to the end of the battle for Iwo Jima. It's just like their first objective was to take Mount Suribachi. So they did that, and they put American flag up as kind of a way to encourage the Marines that they were making progress after just the absolute slaughter of the first couple of days when the Japanese were attacking. And so they raised this flag. And the way the story goes is that some Navy guy wanted this flag as a souvenir, and so they decided to put up a bigger flag. And so this is the famous picture, right? So these group of Marines go up to Mount Suribachi, they take down the first flag, and they put up a much larger flag, and they take with them a press photographer named Joe Rosenthal, and he gets this action picture of them planting this flag and putting it up. And this picture became the most reproduced picture of World War II. And at this point in time, the war in Europe was winding down. We had been fighting for years, and the war against the Japanese was just dragging on. And what they did is they used this picture for the 7th War Bond Tour. And so it was a common, it was a practice of the American government to bring back certain heroes like John Basilone, for example, from Guadalcanal, in this case, some of the flag raisers from Iwo Jima, and they would tour the country to raise money for the war. So the government would sell a bond, which is just basically an investment. You buy a war bond for X number of dollars, and they promise the government pays it back in a certain number of years with interest. So people invest, and then this is how they raise money for the war. So this bond tour raised $26.3 billion, and much of it was because of this patriotic, emotion that people experienced hearing about the Battle of Iwo Jima and the flag, American flag on top of Mount Suribachi. It was just extremely motivating for people to give to the war effort. And of course, there is a memorial in Washington, D.C., kind of near Arlington Cemetery to the Marine Corps. It's this ginormous sculpture of this flag raising. And so you can see the difference, the flag and the pictures blowing forward actually as they're raising it. And here, obviously it's going the other direction. But anyway, this thing's pretty huge. Hopefully you've been there before, or maybe you have a chance to go there. Now, about the flag raisers. So let me share a few things with you. One of the flag raisers that actually survived the Battle of Iwo Jima was IRA Hayes. IRA Hayes was a Pima Indian, as you see here, and he got into the Marine Corps despite a very poor upbringing in Arizona. And he would go to Bougainville, which is in the Solomon Islands. That was his first action in the war. and then he goes to Iwo Jima, and he's part of this group of 6 that raises the flag. And so this information here is based off of a book by James Bradley named Flag of Our Fathers. Maybe some of you have read it, about the Battle of Iwo Jima and the men who raised this flag. It's a great book. The problem is that, so James Bradley is the son of John Bradley, which it talks about up here, who was a Navy corpsman. And James thought that his dad, John, had been one of the flag raisers, because many people thought he was. In fact, John and IRA Hayes and Renee, this guy here, all came back to America after Iwo Jima, and they were part of the 7th bond tour to raise money for the war. Well, it turns out that John Bradley and Renee Gagnon, pronounce his name, actually weren't the flag raisers, but we didn't know that for decades. So we'll get to that in a minute. IRA Hayes, though, this Pima Indian, was a great Marine, and his buddies, some of his, which included 3 of the flag raisers that it talks about here, down here. So Harlon Block and Franklin Sousley and Mike Strank. Those men were all killed in action on Iwo Jima after the flag raising. And these were IRA's buddies. I think IRA's company had about 250 men in it when they landed in Iwo Jima, and by the time of the end of the battle, they only had 27 left. So IRA lost a lot of fellow Marines, and that really messed him up. He came back, he was on this bond tour, he didn't feel like he should be honored. All these people wanted his autograph, and he was kind of lauded as a hero, and he always felt like the heroes were the men who died on Iwo Jima, not him. And this just haunted him, the images of the war and his dead buddies. And so it drove him to alcoholism, and he would die of exposure and alcohol poisoning when he was in his early 30s. In 1955, they found him dead from exposure and alcohol poisoning. Just a very, very sad story. Well, as I was saying, articles have come out, research has been done in the last 10 years, really, about the flag raisers in Iwo Jima. And it turns out that John Bradley and Renee were not actually the ones raising the flag, although they came back and were part of that 7th bond tour. So one of the men was actually Harold Schultz. He was actually from Detroit, and he fought in Iwo Jima. He would come home after the war, and so this article just came out. This is in the Time magazine, June 24 of 2016. Turns out that he was actually one of the flag raisers, but no one. He never told anyone. He was not the kind of guy that would seek attention. And then an article just came out last fall. This one's from October 2019, where it talks about this other guy. His name was, I believe, also Harold PI Keller. So two different Harolds here. And there's a picture of him and his family. His nickname was Pie. You see this here because he played football in high school, and he had so much pie before a game, he threw up on the field in front of the crowd, and the nickname stuck through his life. Anyway, so this picture here shows you where each of the men were. So Harold Pie Keller was actually on the back side instead of Renee. And then Harlon Block, who again died in Iwo Jima, planting the flag. Harold Schultz, not John Bradley. And Mike Michael Strank, he was the leader who would, he was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia, but then would die on Iwo. We think he was actually hit by friendly fire, like a shell from one of the Navy ships, they think got him. I think Harlon was hit by a mortar that ripped him up pretty good. And then I think Franklin got hit by a sniper. So there's Franklin, and then lastly IRA Hayes. So that's kind of the story behind the Flagraisers. And now that's not to say that John Bradley, here's his picture, the Navy corpsman, wasn't also heroic. So it says here that still, so this is still not updated, right? Because they've just came up with this new research in the last few years about who the real Flagraisers were. He received a Navy Cross, which is the medal directly beneath the Medal of Honor as far as awards in battle. And so similar to other corpsmen we've looked at on Iwo Jima, it says here he observed a Marine fall wounded in an open area, and he just ran out there under intense fire. This guy was going into shock. He needed plasma, so he used a rifle to hang up the plasma bag, kind of an IV, and to save the man's life. And then he waved off litter bearers because he said he thought it was too dangerous for them to try to come get this guy. And so when he kind of stabilized his condition, he pulled the man 30 yards back through this enemy fire to save him. And so he was awarded the Navy Cross. So he wasn't a Flagraiser, but still certainly heroic. So okay, so that's the story of the Flagraisers on Iwo Jima. And so here's a picture of IRA Hayes. This, of course, has IRA Hayes as well, and then John Bradley, and then Renee on the bond tour, even though these two guys actually didn't raise the flag. So there's your history trivia for the day. And hopefully you got a deeper appreciation, again, for Iwo Jima and Marines and World War II history.